Hello everyone, Alasdair here. So football has been put on pause. Someone has pressed that massive pause button and we're going to have to wait possibly weeks, possibly months. We're kind of waiting to see. I think we'll learn a lot more from the Premier League meeting that's to come tomorrow. But even then, how much can they actually tell us? Because everything's kind of moving so quickly. People are responding, finding out new things, working out what exactly is happening out there in the world, because it is a strange one. In terms of a football season, even leaving aside all of the, tough stuff that's going on for people with the coronavirus, just as a football season for Tottenham Hotspur, it's been an absolute mess of a season. Everything that possibly kind of could go wrong. If you want to include the stadium delays from last season as well, it's new managers crashing out of all competitions, barring the Premier League. It's been a complete disaster. And then just when you thought the season can get weirder, we have a global pandemic that sweeps across the world, shutting down football everywhere. It's weird. I don't know how you people are dealing with it, but it's obviously very strange to not have football. There's bigger things, obviously, in life. Of course there is, and we know that, and there's people out there suffering. But on a day-to-day basis, a lot of us have been very used to our football. It's a part of our life, certainly for me, and certainly for many people out there. And it's quite interesting to see the way people are dealing with it. You see various clubs are trying retro looks, looking back at old games. Obviously, my job doesn't stop. I'm still writing every day other than a couple of days off about football and Tottenham Hotspur in particular. Which isn't easy, but it's about being creative and having a little bit of fun as well amid all the doom and gloom that we've got around us right now. Spurs' life has been kind of carrying on as well for Tottenham Hotspur. I mean, in terms of training, they came back from Germany and I think they trained for a couple of days after that, then because obviously they were getting ready for the Manchester United game, which we know is now going to happen at a much later date. Then they had the weekend off. Then they came back in and trained on Monday and Tuesday. They're off today. They got a day off, but currently expected to come back into Hotspur Way on Thursday and Friday. Obviously, a lot of that, pretty much the club are going with the government advice. The current club haven't got any coronavirus cases right now. They had one employee was tested last week and was found negative. So they're kind of just getting on with things. Obviously, they're the only London club currently training. Obviously, we know a few of those clubs have had their cases and they've had to shut down. Other ones have done so voluntarily, but Spurs are just kind of going with the guidelines. I see them getting a bit of flack on social media. It kind of works every way, doesn't it? I mean, I understand the logic that you're putting yourself at risk. Of course you are. There's that side of it, but then the club themselves feel that they're doing it in as much of a controlled environment as possible, and they are following the guidelines put out to them by the government and the Premier League. And the Premier League haven't actually said otherwise at this point. If you have no cases, to stop. I suppose it's like some people going into their daily jobs at the moment. I suppose with the schools, although I think that's about to change as well after this video goes out. It's one of those I don't really kind of have an opinion either way. I kind of feel it's how you individually agree with it. It's like there's a strange one. I tweeted out that Spurs were the only club in London training, and Harry Winks liked the tweet. That's not name dropping anyway. It's kind of to prove my point in that everyone then kind of was second guessing, like, oh, what does that mean? Does that mean that he's saying, oh, we're the only club, as some would on social media would say, finally a trophy? And others were saying, oh, it's because he doesn't want to be training. He doesn't think that the players should be training. It's one of those. I think it's individual circumstances. I think certain clubs are taking it in different ways. It may be the case at Spurs, it all goes the wrong way. They could end up getting a case and then have to isolate for 14 days, and that stops this current April 4th thinking. It could work the other way that they don't. It's such an unknown at the moment, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to be the guy that's been told, oh, you're saying this wrong, because I'm absolutely no medical expert whatsoever. Otherwise, I'd be a doctor. If it is, the guidance out there is for people to stay at home if you can. Spurs are following the guidance they've been given, and we shall see what comes of it. It's all It's all so messy. Everyone's kind of got an opinion on it. It's like well, it's unprecedented, isn't it? It's such a strange, different way that the world is having to operate right now. Everything, every little tiny business up to the biggest businesses, and well, it's a mess. It's a mess for everything. Everyone's trying to deal with it. So, in terms of kind of what happens next, April 4th is a current Premier League return date. I think we all know deep down that's probably unlikely. It's going to be incredibly tough for that to happen, especially as we know the UK hasn't hit its peak yet at all in terms of the virus. So there's a Premier League meeting tomorrow. We'll obviously find out a little bit more from that, kind of maybe some more plans going forward, whether that date's going to get pushed, whether they're going to still try to work to it. UEFA have also obviously had their meeting on Tuesday, yesterday. They spoke about, obviously we know the Euros have now been postponed by a year. Elsewhere, outside of UEFA, the Copa America has also been moved a year to 2021 as well. But interestingly, within the UEFA statement that came out, they spoke about June 30th being the end date that they wanted for football leagues across Europe. The logic behind that is June 30th is the last day of many people's contracts. Whenever a player signs a contract, often it's a June 30th finish date. So obviously if the football season goes over that, then everyone runs into real issues when it comes to the contracts and how do you do short-term extensions? Is that even possible? If the season's being played in July, do you just not have to play those players whose contract has ended? You know, for Spurs, that's Vertonghen, Vorm. Some of the academy players might fall into that trap as well. How does that work exactly? So that's why the current guidance is to try and get everything done by June the 30th. Whether that's possible is another thing. As I said, you know, when I'm discussing whether Spurs should be training or not, we just don't know. There's so much unknown. There's so many countries are being criticised for the way they're dealing with it. Some countries are being praised, and it's almost like no one really knows because it's such a new thing in the way it's being dealt with. But June 30th, certainly that's the issue that we're kind of that's the date we're currently dealing with. Personally, there's been so many opinions about this. Is one I am going to give you a straight opinion on. Is people we've got the null and void the season. We've got the just finish the season now as is. I am neither of those. I'm very much I think the season has to be finished. For me, I don't think you worry about next season and the issues of that yet. I think you make sure that this season gets finished. Because for me, if you null and void the season, and if you cut off the season as it is now and declare everything final, the legal minefield and kind of consequences and complications going forward from that are just so immense. I mean, let's take, for example, you null and void it. Liverpool could, if they wanted to, could sue because they'd won the league. Leicester could sue because they should have been in the Champions League, and you know that's up to 100 million you can earn from that. The teams that aren't going to get promoted, you know, they could sue for that as well. There's talk of maybe giving them a parachute payment, but that's clearly never going to make up the enormous amount of sum you'd get if you'd got in. There's talk of an expanded league, which only creates more problems going forward as well. Then the flip side is you take the season as it is now. That runs into all issues as well. You've got the likes of Sheffield United. You know, I remember looking, they've got a game in hand, could catch up Man United if that fifth spot goes to Champions League because of City's issues. Sheffield United miss out when they could quite rightly have won that game, especially with the form they were in. It's a humongous mess, I think, if you go down either of those routes. And, you know, that's the relegated teams as well. Do they miss out on hundreds of millions from the Premier League because they were relegated even though they had a chance with whatever it is, 9 games left to stay up? I just think you finish the season. However it happens, whether it's behind closed doors for the rest of the season, whether it's playing 2 games a week from, you know, end of April onwards, May onwards, or whatever, you just get it done. I think it's the only way for it to be fair. I mean, even that's arguable. Is it fair? You know, with Tottenham, it sounds awful to say it because of obviously all the tough times and suffering some people are having with this, with the coronavirus. But in terms of on the pitch, purely from a football sense, Tottenham are going to benefit from this break. They just are. It's clear to see. You know, the likes of Kane and Son, by the time football restarts, both could possibly be back playing. And that's Spurs' biggest issue that they've had dealt with. And all the matches that they were due to play in that time before the two returned, it's going to be they're going to be rescheduled at a time when they are fit. It's a mess. I'm going to say, if anyone wants to count up the times I've said the word mess, I'm sure it's going to be a ridiculous amount. But it's just so crazy. And then you've got a knock on with the transfer window. We've spoken about contracts ending June the 30th, but then how do transfers work? Does the transfer window then become, do we push that on so it starts in August? And then if the season were to start in September, October, there's going to be so much thinking to do, because now they've pushed the Euros to next summer as well. Obviously, the season can't really overrun next season. Then you've got a season after that where we've got a World Cup slap bang in the middle of it, which is just crazy. There's so much to it, there's pre-season elements as well. Essentially now Spurs are kind of almost having like a mini pre-season right now. Until they get further, obviously it looks like the country will probably go into some kind of lockdown. I think they'll have to for a couple of weeks. Then when all the players and everyone returns from that, then how do they deal with that? Is going to be a mini pre-season. Spurs' original pre-season plans in the proper pre-season were they were going to head to South Korea. Obviously that's very much not going to happen right now. What happens if the pre-season comes in August, September? Do the club still go abroad? Do they keep it local? It's so many things to think about. We're going to come to the financial results for Spurs in a bit, but Daniel Levy, in his message today, the chairman, said this is the biggest challenge that he's ever faced as a chairman, and this is a guy that's just, been responsible for a £1.2 billion stadium complex, which we know has had its issues. So for this to be the biggest thing in his 20-year reign, kind of shows what they're all trying to deal with. And obviously I've got sympathy for a lot of them, because we can see how it's affecting everyday businesses. I really do fear for some of the clubs down the football ladder how this all works, and whether they're going to be able to, like other businesses now with the government, be able to get some kind of help. I really hope they do, because this could finish a few clubs off. My background, if anyone knows what I used to do, was writing about sport, and was the sports editor for a few papers. And local football, they used to have these months where almost a month or 3-week, 4-week blocks where the rain was so bad, teams couldn't play on pitches because the pitches were so waterlogged. So at that level, they're kind of used to having games called off. But once you get into the lower levels of the professional league, the money jumps up, and they're not used to these long periods out of getting any revenues and gate receipts. It's going to be such a difficult time for everyone. So we shall see what happens. Tomorrow I think we're going to learn a bit more, but I'd imagine there's only so much really that people can say right now, because this is kind of out of football's hands as well. It's very much something that the very clever, hopefully scientific medical bods are going to work out, and exactly how this goes. We kind of touched on finance there, so let's talk about Tottenham finances. Let's get away from coronavirus and a lack of football for a little bit. Spurs released today their 2019 financial results. I'm just going to run down some of them in case you haven't seen them, and the difference between last year's, and we'll kind of explain a little bit why, hopefully, in some of them. So much bigger revenue, massive revenue, £460.7 million the club brought in 2019, and that's compared to 380.7 in 2018. So you're looking at 80 million increase there. Gate receipts, they went down. And I'll explain why. They went to their 34.3 million last season, and that's down from 42.6 the previous one. That's because of the shift from Wembley. So Spurs obviously played a chunk of their games last season at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. 2019 financial report would have taken some of those games into account. So that's why it dropped from a full season at Wembley, where obviously you're getting crowds. Certainly maybe not towards the end, but in the bulk of it were big crowds with a 90,000 capacity on some of those. Champions League gate receipts, obviously enormous for last season because of the run to the final. So they were 108.4 million. That's from the previous year was 62.2. Domestic cups, it's such a pittance. It shows you how small the domestic revenue is in terms of the cups compared to the others. So when I've just said 108.4 for Champions League, domestic cup revenue for Spurs was 3.1, and that's actually down from the previous season on 4.4 because of less impressive cup runs, I'd imagine, on that one. TV revenue went up slightly, 149.9 million from 147.6. Then we talk about the profits. Now, this is quite an interesting one because Spurs' overall profits, that's the way the best says. So let's split this up. So profits before football trading, so that's all the normal stuff, they actually went up. They were 172.7 million. Whereas last year, I've got it down here somewhere, 162.5 million. So that's gone up. If you take out that pesky business called football, actual trading around the club, they did make a profit. However, once you include the football stuff, because of course you do, that it went down by quite a lot. So their profit last year was 113 million. Sorry, in 2018. The last year's financial document is 68.6. So that's a big old drop there of 45 million ish. That's come down. And I think a part of that's going to have to be taken account. I know the club gets slated for the lack of transfer spending, and I think that lack, certainly on the previous accounts, would have made up for a lot of their profit. This year, they spent 184 million in player registrations. I've kind of touched on this a lot. The figure, I think, all in on player purchases last season, when you're including add-ons and future things, it's around 200 million or just under. So so they've announced in their records 184 million. So that is why, when you're including football trading in there as well, obviously there's football trading income as well, so it's kind of more to it. But that's why profit-wise they've gone down, because they actually spent some money in transfers as well as part of it. I'm sure there's other things as well. It's not as cut and dried as that, but it does show how kind of more careful, and I think this is where I'm going into a dodgy area where I know the people that want transfer spending, and that's me included, will say, oh, they've still got to spend money. But the club have got to be so careful with how much they spend and kind of balanced up with what they recoup. Because, I mean, if you look at that 68.6 million profit, don't want to be kind of too basic about it, but that's just over Tanguy Ndombele. He was 63 all in. So that's what we're talking about. So the kind of the belief that the club have to buy, they end up running a loss. I know some people will say it's not about a business. It's not, but when you're managing the debt that Spurs are doing from the stadium, their total debt right now is £637 million. It's a lot of debt they're also trying to manage. And here's a little technical bit I wrote down because I wouldn't remember. That's been converted into a mixture of long-term maturities with an average age of 23 years. People with much better grasp of finances will know exactly what that means. From what I can gather, it's simply a more manageable way of cutting down the costs involved in paying off that debt. So I don't think it's as simple as being able to say, hey, Spurs need to throw money at the problems they've had this year when it comes to the summer. I think they're going to have to be quite careful. Mourinho's spoken about having a balanced squad this summer. For next season, whenever that may be. And I think that's going to be part of it. It's going to be some players he's going to want to get rid of. Every new manager coming in, when they get an opportunity, will want to remove the players that obviously are going to be no good to him next season and bring in ones that his Mourinho players, as it were. So I think that's going to play a big role. It's not what people want to hear. They want to. I understand there's a thinking that, Spurs said when they move into the new stadium, they will have money to spend. Yes, but not really straight away. It's not really how it works. Obviously, like I say, they've got that enormous debt, £637 million that's got to be paid off. And like I say, if they're only making profits of just under, 68.6, we'll use the exact number, that's not a lot, is it? And Levy said at the Supporters Trust meeting earlier this month that if Spurs don't get into the Champions League, which is possible right now, then that any transfer budget will be affected by that as well. So I think maybe Spurs fans have to kind of prepare themselves that, and I'd imagine Mourinho will have as well. There'll have been honesty in those meetings. There's no way Mourinho comes into this job thinking he's got the hundreds of millions to spend that he normally does. I think he would have known that if they didn't get into the Champions League, the money would be tight, and it's going to be more about testing his coaching qualities. This is a guy that back in the day took Porto and won everything with them. The Champions League with Porto. He didn't spend hundreds of millions at Porto. I don't even think. I think it was Inter Milan. I don't think he spent a lot at Inter Milan either. As much as his reputation is built on these big signings as well, I think a lot of that comes from his Chelsea time, when he had almost a blank checkbook to work with. I think he has to almost get back to those roots. So it's not what people want to hear. No one wants to hear that the club aren't going to have millions upon millions to spend in the summer. But like I say, I think the fact that they've spent almost 200 million in the last season is kind of, unless they can move players on, and I do wonder now, unless you sell a prized asset, how many players are left that you're going to get big money for? That's certainly a concern for me. You think of the likes of maybe Foyth will move on. I'm trying to think who else is on the outskirts, really. I mean, I don't know if Aurier will still want to move on. He did last summer, but obviously he's playing regularly now. Depends maybe who they look to bring in. Possibly as someone like an Eric Dyer, maybe. It's. I wouldn't say there's masses of money to bring in unless they go for a real big transfer out. A Harry Kane, a Dele Alli. I think Harry Kane, anyone that read the piece I did earlier in the week, I think it's so difficult for anyone to buy Harry Kane. Even if he kicks up a fuss and said, I've given you enough years, which he may do, and he's probably quite right to do so. He's given, 5-6 seasons as the club's main goal scorer. No trophies other than the individual ones he's won himself. But anyone wanting to buy Harry Kane is going to be aware that he has 4 years left on his contract, 2024. Spurs will probably, as they do with pretty much all contracts, have an option to take another year on top of that, so which makes it 2025. And let's remember, this is a football club where Daniel Levy reportedly was believed to be looking for around 100 million for Christian Eriksen last summer, and that's with a year left of his contract. And that was because Eden Hazard went to Real Madrid. I think all in, they reckon it's going to be about 109 million for Eden Hazard. So that was why Spurs were looking for around 100 for Eriksen. Obviously never happened, and eventually they got, which for me was still probably a pretty decent deal of almost about 20 million in for a guy with a couple of months, 5 months or so left on his contract, and didn't want to be there. So if you think that they're asking or looking for 100 million for Eriksen with a year left, just imagine what they're asking for Harry Kane with 4 to 5 years left on his deal. One of the world's best strikers. Yes, he's had his injury issues, but even this season, I was looking at it, he's missed a couple of months with injuries, different, the hamstring injury and the ankle injury. Scored 30 goals for club and country. 30! It's ridiculous. The man is a machine and he will score goals for wherever he goes. Strikers are at a premium, those kind of guys that can do that. I think Spurs look for a world record fee if that happens. I'd hope, and I'm sure all Spurs fans would, that Mourinho, with that guarantee of silverware that he brings to every club, that he and Kane will sit down and say, look, let's give it one more year. Then you'll be 27 the following year, almost 28. Then you will properly be in your prime, and no hard feelings if you want to try and you want to get out of the club then. Because I just feel, especially with all the mess going on right now, with obviously suspension of leagues, when the transfer window is going to be, it's just going to be such a mess. I just can't see it being Kane being the one that raises funds. But yeah, getting back to my original point, sorry as the sunshine goes on my face, Spurs I think are going to have to find money from somewhere. There's going to be some changes needed. We know the positions. We know they're going to need new central defenders with possibly Vertonghen going, maybe Foyth going, possibly a pair of fullbacks, one on either side as well. A defensive midfielder looks to be, especially with Wanyama leaving and Dyer's form. It's maybe getting back to slightly where he was, but it's still dipping in and out. And of course, another striker. My goodness, how many times have we said that? So there's spending that needs to be done, but it's where that money comes from. I think it's going to be, when we eventually get to transfer window, a very, very interesting one, because I think there's going to be a lot of ways this could play out. But I'm going to wrap up there because, we haven't even got football to talk about, and I've still, what have I managed, 24 minutes there so far. So let's see what happens with the Premier League meeting tomorrow. Let's see what comes from the days and weeks ahead. What I'll do, I think, maybe for the next one is if you're always great in your comments below. There's always loads of debate going on, loads of interesting opinions. If you want, stick some questions as well in there, and I'll try and do a Q&A maybe for the next one. Obviously, very fortunate there's hundreds of comments on these, so I'm not going to be able to answer every question if everyone were to ask one. But certainly, if you want to get a question in there, I'll do my best to answer a few of them in the next one. See how many I can do, and then maybe I'll use some more for future ones as well, because we could have weeks without football. And let's be honest, if you're going to be like me, you're going to be stuck inside going stir crazy without football. So at least we can talk and chat about theoreticals, what might be, what might happen, and what's going on as well. So let's wrap up there. Stay safe, everyone. Keep healthy. Do everything you're told to do, in terms of your guidelines and stuff. And then hopefully we'll all get through this sooner rather than later. And then we can get our football back. Catch you later.